Good morning, friends. I think most of you know me. I am Jen, a young adult minister, and Pastor Jason's gone for the weekend, and so I get the pleasure and privilege of introducing our speaker this morning. Part of my job, some of you may or may not know, is to be one of the main connecting points with Luther College and our partnership with Luther College. And so this particular speaker, I have got to know some with that work. And so I am telling you you're in for a treat this morning. This is Dr. Victoria Christman. She is a native of the United Kingdom. And after completing high school, she immigrated to the U.S. with her family, joining relatives in Wisconsin. She received her Bachelor's of Arts in History and Comparative Religion from Harvard, and then her PhD in Early Modern History from the University of Arizona. Since 2005, she has been a professor of history at Luther College in Decorah, Iowa, where she teaches and directs the International Studies program and the Center for Ethics and Public Engagement. Her research and publications are on the history of religious coexistence and tolerance in the 16th century. She is currently enrolled in a virtual master's program as well in refugee protection and forced migration studies through the University of London School of Advanced Studies. Dr. Christman is also the professor that is teaching a class here as part of our Luther Hub program, and so she has been in the building and we've got to know her. And as a fun connection, her husband is also on faculty at Luther and taught here the last 2 years. And so we are starting to feel like we know your family, Victoria, and we are grateful and better for it. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Christman, Victoria, and then afterwards I'll close this out. So thank you so much for being here. Especially when you're here twice in like 3 days. We are grateful for all that you do in your connections.
Thank you for having me. This sounds really loud to me, but does it sound okay to all of you? I am by nature a loud person, so I usually don't need any amplification. And here are my family. Come on in, you guys, and sit down. We discovered this morning it's harder to, well, we didn't discover this morning, we know this. It's harder to get 5 people coordinated and moving and wanting than it is to get one person alone. And so I'll leave it at that. So my name is Victoria, as Jen said, and before I start this presentation, I should tell you that I should explain why I'm doing this presentation this morning, and I should thank some people, including Jen and the folks at Zumbro, who have been so kind and generous and patient as we try to pull together this class this semester. Tracy, who I think just stepped out, has saved me on so many occasions because in addition, so I have students who come on a Thursday and sit where you are for our class, but then we have a group of students in Decorah who Zoom into the class, and we did this as a pilot just to see how it works. And I think the answer to the question is it doesn't work very well. Because I have speakers coming in and they do presentations, but then we're Zooming these students in from Decorah who are also on the screen, and inevitably a microphone doesn't work, or something goes wrong every single week, which is a learning experience. But I'm grateful, and I'm grateful also to Mark, whose name I thought was Eric, who's the evening custodian, who's also been super great with us, and so it's been a fantastic experience. So this is what I have been asked to talk to you about today. Pastor Jason said he thought that it would be good, I think he phrased it, if you could come and tell the class, the adult ed class, something about our community here in Rochester. And I thought, I can't tell you about your community here in Rochester, but I am learning about your community here in Rochester, so I'll explain how that happened and what we're doing in this class. The title of the class is Rochester City of Refuge, the Ethics of Immigration and Integration. And I'll explain why that is the title as well. If you were listening to what Jen said in her introduction of me, then you may realize that it's bizarre that I am teaching this class because I am actually a Reformation historian. And so somehow I have gone from the Reformation in Europe to immigration in Rochester, and I feel like it requires a little bit of explanation. So basically, my work is on, or has been on, the development of toleration. So when I publish stuff, I publish about religious coexistence and the very early beginnings of tolerance, meaning like in the 1500s, right? As soon as the Reformation happened, when there were people now to dislike. How did they get past that? That's been my own research. And so this is what I do and have done traditionally. But at Luther College, we're a small liberal arts college where you get to teach things that you didn't know you knew anything about, which when I first came there I thought was a negative, but has been one of the most enriching things of my time there, actually. And I found myself in 2008 on a committee to develop a major in international studies. And I ended up loving this. This was my favorite work that I had done at the college, mostly because I felt like I found my people. Like, these were students who wanted to go study abroad. I'm from abroad, right? I'm not from the Midwest. So I loved this work. And we made the major, and then I ended up directing the major and teaching in the major. And because I know really nothing about this field, what I mostly taught was directed research classes where students would do their own legwork, and I would just help them find the information that they needed. But if you do that for a decade, you learn an awful lot of stuff from your students. And so that ended up happening to me. And so then I ended up having this very organic shift in interest, not away from, I'll always be interested in the Reformation and tolerance, but some of those issues are not that difficult to translate into the modern world, right? We're still in need of understanding the religious other and learning how to coexist with people who are different from us. And so over time, I ended up looking at those things in modernity as opposed to in the 16th century. And then I went to a talk by chance at the Nobel Peace Prize Forum in Augsburg College in Minneapolis, and I heard a lecture by Eric Schwartz, who was Obama's, Secretary of State for Refugees, or Assistant Secretary. He had some position over refugees in the Obama administration. And he now is the head of Refugees International, which is an academic kind of a think tank that helps refugees. And I asked a question at this lecture, and he just looked at me and he said, "There is an answer to that question, but it's very complicated. You should take a class I teach at the Humphrey School in February." So I did. I took his class, and I loved it. And so that got me into this field, and I ended up signing up for a master's program at through the University of London. It's virtual. But I had a sabbatical in 2020, and that was the year in which you could not travel to do research for your sabbatical. So a virtual degree seemed like a great idea in 2020, and so here I am. So that is how I went from 16th century Antwerp, Belgium, to Rochester, Minnesota in 2021. So this class is not the blind leading the blind, but it's definitely the sort of like short-sighted leading the people who've just not done this before. So this is not a field in which I'm an expert. It's a field in which I'm an eager learner. And it's part of a program at Luther, I think I put this on here, called Paideia. This is the symbol of Paideia. And the word Paideia means, it's the Greek word for sort of the education of the whole person. And the motto of the Paideia program for years has been learning in community. And so I think I am embodying the motto of the Paideia program with this class. But what I thought I would do is, so Luther has this hub that Jen talked about in Rochester, where we send anywhere from a handful to, 15 or 20 students. And they live in Rochester for a semester, and they do a very intense internship. So an 8-credit, like a 20-hour a week, maybe just shy of that internship somewhere in town. And they take 2 classes taught by Luther faculty in order to make them full-time, so they can keep their financial aid and all the rest of it. So this is one of those classes. And I thought, it has to be a class that deals with ethics. That's part of the Paideia program. And when they were asking for someone to be willing to teach this class, I thought, wow, this fits really well, actually, because the city of Rochester has such a rich ethnic makeup, right? You have groups of people who came here as refugees or who immigrated here in large groups. This would be a fantastic place to do a sort of case study. So that's what I dreamt up for this class. And my idea was to do a 3-part investigation of this issue. So the first part is really the only part that I know anything about. And that was the sort of law and policy of immigration generally, right? So that's what I've been studying for the last year and a half. So I felt like I knew enough to put together a solid 4 weeks of baseline information for students. So we spent the first 4 weeks of class reading scholarship and the most recent work on how immigration functions, how states decide how many refugees to let in, and just refugee law generally, which is super complicated and you could study for the rest of your life, right? But we decided 4 weeks was enough for a good grounding. So one of the big questions that we've been wrestling with, or that the students have been wrestling with, is the international law on refugees really still rests on the Convention and Protocol relating to the status of refugees, which was written in 1951. So it's written very much in the aftermath of World War II, right? And so if you imagine Europe in 1951, there are massive numbers of people migrating from country to country, people who find themselves in Poland, even though they were born in Greece, who now are stateless, right, or don't want to go home, or they need help. So this document was written by the UN as a way of helping them, and it defines, still today, who we consider to be a refugee, who qualifies for refugee protection. And basically, the people who qualify to be refugees are people who, owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion, is outside the country of his nationality and is unable, or owing to such fear, is unwilling to avail himself of the protection of that country. That person is a refugee. So it's not a simple definition. And it's a little bit fraught, right? If it's 1951, you can imagine people who easily fit this description, right? If you are a Jewish person who was captured by the Nazis in Spain or Greece and taken to Poland, then you have a well-founded fear of persecution for reasons of religion, right? Or maybe you're Dietrich Bonhoeffer and your reason is a political opinion, right? That you're opposed to National Socialism. You clearly fit this description. And your country isn't going to protect you because it's been taken over by Hitler and his minions, right? In 1951, this made perfect sense. Today, there are lots of groups and individuals who need protection, but don't necessarily fit this description, right? If you think about the Haitians who just made their way to the southern border of the US, they don't fit this description, right? Because they're fleeing really because of the earthquake, they're fleeing because they don't have a functioning government, but they're not afraid of persecution, on those 5 grounds. And so I've had a very, pardon me, I think I'm choking on my mask. I've had a really interesting time helping students navigate the reality of the fact that not everyone who's in danger is a refugee. That doesn't mean we can't help them, although often we don't help them. But it means if we do help them, we help them for different reasons, right? But not because they get the label refugee. And I normally work with international studies students and history students. And one of the things I've learned this semester is I have a bunch of social work students in my class, and they in particular are super social justice focused and idealistic and kind of naive in all the best ways. And this has been really hard for them. Like the idea that a person would present themselves, oh, you're lovely, thank you, would present themselves to a US official and be in legitimate danger, but not be able to qualify as a refugee has been so hard for them to grasp. So we've spent a long time dealing with that, with this sentence, basically. And we continue to do that. In addition to the legal background, we've also talked about the ethics of integration. How do you take a community of people who are not from here and help them be from here, right? That's no small task. How much do you expect them to become like you? How much do you help them preserve what makes them different? Like, where's the balance in those things? That has been an interesting conversation. But all of this very academic, right? All in the sphere of the theoretical. So the third thing that I wanted to do in this class was really talk about how this all looks in the city of Rochester. And I don't know, I don't live in Rochester. I live in Decorah, and we have to drive 70 miles to find an immigrant community. Actually, that's not true, 25 miles pretty much. But the third part of the class, I have been trying to bring in guests. I've been bringing in guests who work in this field and can give a kind of human face to the academic discussions that we've been having, and that has been really exciting. So those people have been so far Nisha Kurup, who is a woman who works for the IMA here in town, which is the Intercultural Mutual Assistance Association of Rochester. And she came and told us the vast variety of programs that this group has specifically to help newcomers to Rochester. So they do have programs that are just for refugees. They also have programs for people who don't speak English, who need help with translation work. She works with victims of domestic abuse and other kinds of trauma. So it was a surprisingly large swath of aid that is available through this organization. And so that was really humanizing of this process for the students, right? To realize that all of those needs are here in Rochester, which is not New York, right, or Chicago. But people who come need this kind of support. So we had a fantastic visit with her. Beyond her, we had one of your own come and speak to us, Kirsten Lincoln from the Open Table Ministry. So I don't know your church well as a church. I don't know your church at all as a church, although we are going to go to church today, so we'll get a taste. But is it a big enough church that some people don't know about these, because I'm sure you have 6 billion ministries that are operating sort of around the center of the church. But are you mostly familiar with the Open Table Ministry? Yes. To me, it sounds fantastic. And Kirsten, her presentation was great because she talked about the specific communities that Open Table serves. So it sounds as though they go to a primarily Latinx community, and then they go to a community that's primarily Somali and maybe Vietnamese. And she talked about how different it was to overcome cultural barriers in each of those different communities. So she said the Latinx people really had no problem with a burrito truck. Like, that's culturally kind of normal for them, right? They've seen burrito trucks. But the Somali population didn't know what to do with a burrito truck. Like, that took a while to break through those barriers. And gender issues with who to approach in the Somali community and who should do the talking and all the kind of things that you can imagine. But to have one person come and talk to the students about all the different cultural awareness that you have to operate a food truck, like, that was mind-boggling for the students. And she also talked about the legal aspects of operating a food truck. That gave me a whole new appreciation for anybody running a restaurant for whom English is not a first language, because she said filling out the forms for commercial food production took weeks. And she is a native English speaker. So now whenever I go to a restaurant, which I never do anymore, but when I dream of going to a restaurant that is from someone who doesn't speak English, I have a whole new appreciation for that too. So this was a really good visit from her. On this past Thursday, we had a visit from a colleague of mine whose name is Susan Schmidt, and she teaches in social work at Luther. But she, prior to coming to Luther, did a lot of work with the UNHCR, which is the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, so the Office of the High Commissioner. And she works with unaccompanied minors who come to the US. So she conducted hundreds of interviews with unaccompanied children. And on the basis of those interviews, then wrote her dissertation and now publishes. That's kind of the basis of her work. But she was able to talk to us, not necessarily about people coming to Rochester specifically, but issues that face unaccompanied minors and those who would help them. And some of the things that she was able to talk to us about that blew my mind were things that you wouldn't normally think about, but are very simple, such as, who is a minor? What constitutes a minor? We would say maybe 18, people who are under 18. Is that true if you're in a country where you get married at 14 or 15? Then do we change the age of minority to fit their cultural workings? Who do you release minors to? If a minor comes with a man and she says, this is my uncle, but it's not really her uncle, genetically he's not her uncle, he's her mom's friend who they call uncle, does the US government release that child to that man? Even though we know nothing about that man and he might be human trafficking this child? Like all of these kinds of questions where definitions of terms are really important. So she talked a lot about those kinds of things, and that was a fascinating visit from her. Yeah, there was a lot more to that, right? But she really tackled the sort of ethics. This is one of the areas of immigration work that you would think is the ethically most simple, right? These are children and they need help. But she helped us to understand the fraught nature of even that simple refugee work. So that was really good. These are the guests we've had so far. In the future, so a week from Thursday, we're going to go to the Rochester STEM Academy. And you guys are all familiar with these places, but I am not. So another colleague of mine, Jill Lee, is in the education department, and she worked as a consultant when a group of Somali parents started this school. And so she and I had a few conversations in which we decided this would be a fantastic visit, because best practice in refugee academia suggests that refugees arrive in a country and you put those kids in school. They learn the language, they learn the culture, they help educate the parents, and then you send them out into the world and everything is fine. But this group had the opposite experience, right? Where their kids went into schools, they were discriminated against, it was a horrible experience, and they ended up forming their own school. And my understanding, although we haven't been there yet, is that this is primarily a Somali school now, right? The kids are almost 100% Somali, but they have generally very good outcomes. So in a way, they're operating really against the tide of what people are recommending for immigrant communities. And so my question in visiting with these people is, maybe we got it wrong. Maybe you do need 4 years of high school to be with your own, right? To be with people where you feel safe. And then you go out into the bigger world and college and whatever you do next. But that would be kind of really going against the flow of what's considered best practice. So I think that will be a really interesting experience for us. Stay tuned for how that goes. The other visitors we're going to have are from your own Dinka congregation here at the church. So William Deng and Peter Cott, who I've not met but I've been in touch with, are going to come and talk to the students about their personal experiences as refugees. Which of course, there's no better way to humanize a an issue than to have a human come and tell you their experience. So I'm really excited to have them come and talk to us about their journeys. And then finally, and this person I have yet to nail down, but I've been in touch with Dee Sable, who works at the Diversity Council, and I didn't meet her, we talked on the phone, but literally every person in Rochester I talked to about this issue said, oh, you need to talk to Dee Sable. So in my mind, all of Rochester is a sort of pyramid that ends at the top with Dee Sable. And she was great, I had a great chat with her. And she suggested a different lady that I should speak to who is most involved in integration issues with refugees in Rochester. And I've been in touch with her a few times, but 40 Afghan families are coming to Rochester to be integrated as part of a new sort of wave of refugees that we've just created. And she's really involved with that effort. So I'm trying to get her to carve out an hour on a Thursday to come and chat with the students, but we have yet to see if we can pull that off. But that, I think, would be a real sort of crowning visit of this semester, because she's so in the thick of it with the people that she's working with now. So my hope is that I can have her come and pull that off. So yeah, so it's been a fantastic semester so far. I have learned an awful lot about not just the sort of human face of these issues that I myself have been studying in sort of the academic realm, but also I've learned a lot about your city that is fascinating to me, and kind of surprising, I have to say, that a fairly small city, right? Rochester's not Minneapolis, Rochester's not Chicago, has such a rich community and makeup, and it has problems that are really thorny, but so many people who are really in the thick of things, elbows to the wheel, trying to figure out these problems. And I haven't lived in every city in the US, but it seems to me that there's something unique here in terms of how many different groups are putting their efforts together in the same direction and trying to make these things work. And that's been really encouraging to me in a period of time where not much in society has been encouraging. So I think, yeah, I have no sort of final lesson or takeaway to leave with you, other than to say that I'm super grateful that our students get a taste of this area of Rochester, and that the church has been so willing to help hook me up with a lot of these people for the benefit of the students too. Yeah, and I hope that we can do this again in the future, because I think the associations that we're making with these people make it easier then next time, right, to hook up with them and have them chat with the students. But yeah, that is the sort of lay of the land of what I've been busy with these last few weeks. But I'd be happy to answer questions about any of it if I'm able, because you may well ask me questions to which I do not know the answer, which happens every Thursday. But so I'm okay with that too. So yeah, or if you have ideas from people you know of things that I've not included in this model that would be beneficial to include, that would also be great. The next phase of the class after this is that students will do their own research projects, where they'll link an issue that we studied with an NGO or a group that we were introduced to, and then they'll do sort of a presentation on how those two things go together. So they've made a start on that, but that's in the early phases of development. Any question? That was a strange noise that just came out of my mouth.
So
Yeah.
Recently there was a study in the newspaper, I read, about the vulnerability of our national security because of global warming. And I see that as a major event in immigration. I mean, Haiti's a good example, isn't it?
Yeah.
Of that. And so, is that come up, especially with the idealistic social worker group in their conversation?
I'm going to get in trouble with my social worker colleagues,
Well,
but yeah.
I appreciate that.
Me too. I've taught for Luther for 16 years now, and there was actually a phase in the middle where I felt like we had lost the idealism in our students, and they all seemed just a little bit jaded. And so it's encouraging, I think, to see it come back. So yeah, especially these days when idealism, there are many reasons not to have it. But yeah, it is a really important topic because there are growing numbers, and they're only going to get bigger, right, of climate refugees who don't qualify as refugees because natural disaster and climate change are not one of the grounds on which you flee in fear. So we have talked about how that might look, and the problem is, so all the students, all but one, just want to change the definition, right? That's the solution. We just need to add women, and we need to add climate refugees and a few other things, and then we'll be good. But the problem with that, of course, is that now we know about climate refugees. We know there are women and other gender minorities that need protection. We don't know what the next wave of people who need protection will be, right? So do you change the definition every 10 years? And at the moment, there are 149 nations who signed on to the convention, the Refugee Convention. They might not sign again if we add, right? If we add climate refugees and they see the possibility of literally millions of people seeking refuge, I don't know if the US would sign on to that agreement to promise to help. And it's the UN, right? They have no enforcement power other than embarrassing you publicly as a nation. And so I think part of the issue is that the UN wants to keep the 149 countries that it has who are signatories of that convention, and they're afraid of scaring them off. So instead they're writing new resolutions and new guidelines to help interpret that article in ways that are more inclusive. But climate refugees, climate fleers are a growing group, and we don't at the moment have a good solution for how to help them. Yeah?
I think you answered my question before I asked it. My question was going to be, how would you redefine what it means to be a refugee? And it seems to me what you're really saying is that's really difficult. It needs to be worked out, but the danger is we may lose
Support.
support for refugees.
Yeah, the figures are staggering. So there are about 25 million people in the world who currently qualify as refugees. So according to that definition, they are refugees. There are another, the total is 80 million, so whatever the difference is, who are migrating but are not considered refugees. And they might be, I mean, there are economic migrants, right, who can't earn a living where they live and are fleeing for a better life. But then there are also people who are internally displaced. That's the majority of migrants. So if you think of sub-Saharan Africa, for example, and all of the civil wars and disturbances, like in Egypt right now, in Tigray, the people who flee Tigray but go to another area of Egypt, in a way are refugees, but they're not outside their country of nationality, so they don't qualify as refugees. And that's an issue of sovereignty, right? We can't go into Ethiopia and tell them their business, right? And tell them that these people need protection and you're not doing your job. Because if it's the Ethiopian government who's persecuting them, that creates issues of sovereignty and foreign policy. So they're called IDPs, internally displaced people, and they are the largest group of needy migrants at the moment in the world. And they're another category where it's really hard to figure out how to help those people because governments have sovereign rights over how they treat their own people. And again, the UN is trying to make workarounds, and so they've come up with this new policy that's called the R2P. They really like acronyms, the UN. I've learned. The R2P is the responsibility to protect. And so they're saying that a government has the responsibility to protect its citizens, and if it fails to do that, then the international community has the right to intervene. So that kind of gets around the sovereignty issue, but there are lots of ways in which every single country fails to protect a group of its inhabitants, and no country wants, UN people coming in and telling them their business. So I don't know which is the joy of teaching a class like this, right? I can ask an essay question which says, do you think we should amend the Refugee Convention? And then I can grade their responses. But I wish I had the answer. I would be head of the UNHCR, but even he doesn't have the answer. It's a really, really complicated fraud issue. And I think the solution at the moment is workarounds. They're trying to, it's almost like whack-a-mole, right? So LGBTQ populations, there's no protection for them, will come up with a protocol. Internally displaced people, another protocol. So they're trying to stick their thumb in all the dikes, which is not the most efficient, maybe, way to do it. But in a way, it's all we have at the moment, I think. It's a bad answer, but it's a bad situation. I feel like it's not my fault the answer is bad. Yeah.
I think your assessment of Rochester is correct. I say that I grew up in Norwegian ghettos. And our neighbors now on the east side of us, when we moved in, was a Bosnian family. Most recently, it's been a Iran family who sold to an Iraqi family.
Wow.
And on the west side of us, when we moved in, was a Moroccan family. Now it's a Mexican family. Across the street is a Cambodian refugee, and then next to her is a refugee from Somalia.
Wow.
This is the neighborhood I live in, which isn't at all like the Norwegian ghetto I grew up in.
That makes us such a rich place, right? A tapestry of people. But it also, there are people who see that and think that it's a rich tapestry of people, and there are people who see that and see it as a problem, right? And so I also understand that your city has to deal with that kind of tension too, and that I know less about, right? I haven't invited anyone in to complain about the ethnic makeup of Rochester, and I don't know who that would be, but I'm sure that there are people out there who don't like it. But I just am impressed by how hard the city is trying to make it work. Yeah.
I have a question that might be pretty broad, but I'm curious. So, in your thinking and your work of 16th century tolerance,
Yeah.
what are the one or two biggest sort of pieces or insights about that are most relevant to Rochester today?
Oh wow, that is a big question. It's always dangerous to ask a historian about their research, so I'm going to try really hard to not just blather. I would say that probably it's just one big takeaway. So the research I did was on the city of Antwerp, which is this beautiful city in Belgium that in the 16th century was a cosmopolitan center. It was a trade hub. And so all kinds of different people met in Antwerp. And when the Reformation happened, the Catholic Church, for the first time, faced all of these competing secret churches, right? So there were Lutherans there were Anabaptists there who nobody liked them on either side. But there was a huge population of baptized Jews who it turns out were actually not baptized, they were just Jews, but they were trying not to get killed, right? So they said they were Christians. And there were Muslim people there because they were traders. And the Catholic authorities went after these heretics, right? They see all of these people, at the time they saw all of these people as heretics. And that was their job. They were supposed to go after those people, right? It was the right thing for them to do. But what I found was the people on the ground, so not the authorities, but the inhabitants, really went to bat for their heretic neighbors. And so you would have a Catholic merchant going to the authorities and saying, I do not want you to burn this Lutheran guy. He's a Lutheran, and I get it that that's a problem. Nobody wants the Lutherans around. But if you burn him, then I can't sell my books because he's my bookseller and I need him. And so this whole network of protection grew up that had nothing to do with the desire for religious coexistence, but had everything to do with practical relationship necessity, right? And it could be as simple as, he's my neighbor and you can get along with him even if he disagrees with what you believe in. That was more rare. But the economic argument was really strong. And the king was not immune to the economic argument because ultimately he made money from the people in the mix too. So I think the takeaway, it's not a sort of beautiful humanistic takeaway, right? But my takeaway from it is people are fundamentally human, and it is in their best interests to forge relationships that can be maintained. And if you can help them do that, then you can sort of not paper over, but you can facilitate difficult relationships that it's hard to enforce. Because the other thing that we saw when I edited some books that were on slightly later history, so in the 1650s, and by that time the government had enacted laws that said you have to get along with your neighbor, even if your neighbor disagrees with you. And then things started to fall apart. People didn't like being told that they had to do it. But if you could come alongside people and help them do it in a sort of informal way, that worked better, at least in the 16th century. And I think there are lessons in that today, and I think it's what all of these people in their own way are doing. It's hard to make that a policy, right? Because the policy is the enemy in that theory. But so I think all of this, especially this kind of thing, like fostering goodwill, humanizing the other, and getting to know people who are different from yourself, I really think that that's a big first step in coexistence of any sort, peaceful coexistence. Yeah.
And that brings me to be, I guess, interested in how to integrate. And the first thing that comes to my mind is, this is awesome to have people here listening to you and learning, being educated toward what's going on. So how can we bring people from the minorities with us to learn about us, that we learn about them, that the Lord has made each and every one of us. We are each unique, and that there is something for each one of us. How can we do this? Have you talked about any of that with your students, or how to bring that integration? We talk about it in Rochester, but do we? Could we bring conversations? Could we bring those listening forums so that we listen to the other person, not just tell them about us, but we listen to them?
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on the way to proceed?
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
I'm way underqualified
Yes.
for that question. But I would say, I think you're doing some of that stuff already.
Okay, can you tell us?
Yeah, so I had a student, I think 2 years ago now, who was part of the Rochester semester, and he was an international studies student. So his internship was with the Diversity Council, but he was part of this intercultural city initiative. I can't remember the exact name of it, but they were doing things like the Human Library. Have you heard about that?
Yes, I've heard.
So the more I talk, the more I realize I love these individual initiatives. I think that they're really powerful. And so the Human Library project, for those of you who don't know, you go to a space like this, and people volunteer to be a human book. And so you check someone out. I would say, I'm going to check you out for half an hour, and we sit and have a cup of coffee, and you tell me your story. And you might be a Somali refugee, or you may have a story that's very different from mine. And the idea is those conversations do exactly what you're describing, right? You listen to one another and learn from each other's experiences. We've done a lot of, so I direct our Center for Ethics at Luther at the moment, and we've done a lot of work in dialogue. We've worked with a group in Minnesota called the Braver Angels Citizens Initiative, which is trying to depolarize political dialogue in this country. Clearly they have not cracked this nut yet, but they're working on it. And their method is to just learn to listen to the person. You're not going to change your opinion. You're going to walk away from the conversation thinking still that opinion is wrong. But if you can hear where it's coming from, there is a humanizing element that happens there, right? That cools down the political discourse. That's their method. That can be applied to all kinds of situations, I think. And we've worked for years at Luther with the Nansen Center for Peace and Dialogue in Lillehammer, Norway. There's this guy there called Steinar Brynn, who is one of my heroes. He's been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, he's an amazing man, right? He's been working in Bosnia and that whole region for 30 years, bringing together people whose families killed each other 30 years ago, and sitting them on either side of a table and having them be in dialogue and just listen to each other. And they're never going to like each other, right? You killed my mother, right? I mean, it's that close. But he gets them to the point where they view each other as human beings. And now he's in Ireland, and he's working in Israel and Palestine and all kind of hot areas. And so the work I've been most involved with is on that level, right? I mean, it's small groups of people, and it's not flashy and fancy, but I think it moves the dial slowly and maybe leads to bigger initiatives that are taken up by people. But I really do think that there is a lot of that stuff happening in Rochester. And because it's not big and flashy, it might not get the attention that it deserves. Go on, what were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say, I'm wondering if we need to more spread what is going on.
Yeah.
Somehow, that people do know, that people can come to those groups, that people can be involved. I don't know, it's just a thought.
No, I agree. It also needs scaffolding, right? Because often there are linguistic barriers and things like that need, but even that is being done. I mean, the IMA has translation services, and all these people working together are making it happen. But you're right, maybe the word is not getting out as much as it can. I think Jen's slowly moving in my direction, which probably means
Time for like one more question.
Okay.
A quicker question. Otherwise, we'll thank Christman.
there's always pressure for the last question. Yeah.
So the line between climate change and its impact on so when you talk about Haiti, you talk about the climate refugees, actually
Economic. The two things go together.
There's a hurricane.
Yeah, or an earthquake, or fill in the blank. Yeah, no, the lines are all blurry, right? So I would say two things, very briefly, that we've talked about with regard to this in class. One is, the students felt really strongly that we should be helping the Afghan refugees because we did that, right? We went to war, we messed everything up, and then we took out all the troops and it was too fast and we caused the problem. And so I said to them, okay, we have all these people coming from Central America, and if you look at the history of Central and South America, we did a lot of stuff there too that caused problems that you could say caused migration. So what is the statute of limitations on who is responsible for helping the people who are in trouble? That was one question we raised and didn't answer. The other thing that I read that I found fascinating was a book by Alan Alenikoff, who works in New York. I can't remember at which university. But he's written a book called The Arc of Protection, and it's about the current refugee regime and how he thinks it needs to be changed. He has the most radical idea that I've read so far. His idea is that anyone who is fleeing should be considered a refugee. And if you're fleeing for economic reasons or climate or anything, it doesn't matter what your reason is, you shouldn't have to prove persecution or any of those things. You should just be considered a refugee and be open to receiving protection. And And he said, my first reaction is, how could we possibly afford that? And he says there are 80 million of these people, there will still be 80 million of these people. And so whatever we're doing now, we still would be it would cost not that much more because we're still dealing with them. They just would have a different label and then therefore more options of how to be helped. The students didn't like that, believe it or not. But I wonder if there isn't somewhere, you know, along that spectrum where there is room for change and we could help more people if we were able to change some of the definitions. But if you're interested in that question, I would strongly recommend that book. It's really provocative. The Arc of Protection. It just came out last year.
Victoria, thank you.
Thank you all.
To talk about the intersections of what's happening in the world and the intersections of our faith and immigration and refugee work, and I mean, it's part of our story as Christians and as Judeo-Christians, right? And so thank you for helping us wrestle with that and reminding us that sometimes what we want to simplify is really hard to simplify, but it's complex and has all the facets of all these pieces, and thank you for helping us accompany that next generation with these questions, because I'm afraid we're leaving them a big mess. And so thank you for bringing that, your expertise and your gifts and your care for humanity and for humans to our younger humans, and for being part of that community here. So thank you.